Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Kiddushin. This is our 8th lesson, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 53 through 59. And before I begin, I really just want to dedicate our learning this evening and every day for the speedy recovery of all of those that have been injured, and in memory, Li'ilui Nishmat, the hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 people who have been murdered in the past 4 days. And really, our learning should be in merit of a quick and speedy peace in our country, Be'ezrat Hashem. So we're going to jump right in to Daf 53. If you remember last week, we ended off discussing what are different things that can be used in order to create the betrothal. And last week we mentioned we ended with a Mishnah that talked about things that were sanctified. And do we see them as gods, right? They have sanctity. So are they gods? And therefore you can't use it for any transaction, i.e. for a betrothal. Or are they, even though they're sanctified, they're still ours, and therefore you can use it for betrothal. So we gave a list last week of things that could not be used. So today on Daf 53, the Gemara tells us that you cannot use your portion of sacrificial meat to betroth a woman. Again, we're talking about a Kohen, a priest who received the sacrificial meat to eat in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. He cannot take that piece of meat and betroth the woman with his steak. Even though he can eat it and it has value to him, it's still seen as owned by God or being shared by God, and therefore you cannot use it for Kiddushin. Another thing is that the Kohanim, the priest, couldn't trade one thing that they received for another thing that they received, right? So if they got this portion as opposed to another portion, you could not switch. You could not trade one person for another, or different types of meat, or even the same type. You can't trade one for the other. Okay, the next thing that the Mishnah told us last week is Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'aser Sheni is a tithe that you separate on year, again, if it's a 7-year cycle, so on year 1, 2, and 4, and 5, you separate this tithe. It's yours, but you have to eat the produce in Jerusalem. So let's say, you're not going yet, you can transfer the sanctity onto money. The money you take to Jerusalem, and then when you get to Jerusalem, you buy yourself a really nice shawarma, and you eat the shawarma in Jerusalem. So Maser Sheni money, one would think is yours because you're just going to take it and eat, buy food with it and eat it. So the Gemara says, no, it's considered sanctified to God, even though you are going to benefit from it. It is not yours, and it's actually God's, and therefore you cannot use it for Kiddushin. Hekdesh, something that is sanctified. If you remember, we've seen this previously, where you take an item and you say, I sanctify this item for God. So that item is called hekdesh. It's sanctified, and that is not permissible to use for Kiddushin. Now, the Mishnah last week told us that if you use it on purpose, so then it's valid. But if you do it by accident, it's invalid. Or maybe it's the opposite. And it seems that the idea here is that are you doing it on purpose or are you doing it by accident? The Gemara says, and we have the same machloket for Maser Sheni, if you did it by accident or you did it on purpose. So the Gemara explains why is there a difference. So Maser Sheni, she doesn't want to be she doesn't want to be betrothed with it because she doesn't want to take the money then up to Jerusalem. Therefore, it's invalid because she doesn't accept it as a valid Kiddushin, a valid betrothal. But he doesn't mind using it. They both don't want hekdesh because they can't use that at all, and therefore it's invalid. Or maybe it's the opposite, right? Neither of them wants the Maser Sheni money, but for hekdesh, she wants it because with hekdesh you can transfer the money onto something else, and then that item becomes mundane, it becomes cholin, where you can use it, and therefore maybe she would accept it for her betrothal. Let's say, right, he tried to use sanctified items to betroth her. We said it's invalid, but the question is, does the money that he used, right, it's either money or something of value. So let's say he used money. Does it become chulin? Does it become desanctified when he tried to use it? So the Gemara says no, because it doesn't create a betrothal. It also doesn't work to make the money mundane, to make the money usable. This is the same case in the case of a sale. It's also the same situation, that if you try to buy something that you weren't supposed to, it does not disqualify the money. Okay, so now the Daf 54 tells us that our Mishnah is speaking about a Kohen, again a priest, who betrothed a woman with bigdei kuhuna, with the clothing of the priest, and they were not worn out. And the Gemara asks, is the clothing, right? The clothing is made for the benefit of the Kohen. So because he receives benefit from it, maybe he can use it to betroth the woman. And we say, no, you cannot use it to betroth a woman. From here, since we're talking about using sanctified money for a non-sanctified purpose, the Gemara talks about the half a shekel. If you remember, we learned this a long time ago in Masechet Shkalim, the machatzita shekel, the half a shekel. This was used to fix the walls of Jerusalem. It was used for many public works, and the Gemara says that you use it to fix the walls of Jerusalem. Maybe if I use that money to fix the walls of Jerusalem, maybe the walls of Jerusalem are sanctified, and then therefore, if let's say a stone falls out of the wall, if you use that stone, it's as if you're stealing from God, which is called mi'ilah. The Gemara says no, that's not necessarily the case. Some say yes, others say once you buy an object with that money, then that object is not sanctified. If you use sanctified items on purpose, the Gemara now says it does become mundane, it does become chulin, unsanctified. But if you do it on purpose, it doesn't. Or maybe, as we said, maybe the opposite. So the Gemara tells us that the law is for Maser Sheni, it's considered God's money, and therefore you can't use it. But if something is hekdesh, if something is sanctified, if you use it by accident, it does become mundane, and if you use it on purpose, it does not. Okay, now we have another machloket about what's called kerem revai. These are fruits that have grown when you plant produce, fruit trees. So you're not allowed to eat from those fruit trees for the first 3 years. And the 4th year has a special law. It's called Kerem Revai. And here the question is, does it belong to the owner, or is it sanctified and it belongs to God? That is the machloket. Let's say the temple treasurer sends an agent to buy something for himself, meaning not for the temple, with sanctified money, which he's not allowed to do. And then they both realize before the sale that it was sanctified. So the owner of it and the agent realized that there was a problem. So the storekeeper is the one who is seen as doing mi'ilah, as stealing from God or misappropriating from God, when he spends the money that he received. Okay, another question the Gemara asks and says there's a machloket on how we look at produce that was just harvested, but we didn't take off any of the gifts that we needed to give to the Kohanim or the Leviim. It's called tevel. Tevel means it wasn't separated yet. How do we see this? Is it, right, let's say you give tevel as a gift. Now, do we say that there's maaser, there's the tithe, is mixed in with it, and now he gave a gift of chulin, right, things that are usable, and maaser, right, but they're seen as separate? Or do we say no? The whole thing is tevel, and we don't see it as parts, different parts. Okay. Daf 55 tells us that if you find a kosher animal wandering near Jerusalem, right, within the outside of the city limits, meaning from Jerusalem to what's called Migdal Eder, which was a surrounding village. If you draw like a circle around Jerusalem, if you find an animal wandering around, you assume that it's a sacrifice, right? You assume that it is sanctified because it must have been for the temple and it got lost. And the Gemara tells us what type of animal is what type of sacrifice. So the Gemara says the person can take upon himself the value of this animal to buy a sacrifice, and then he can deconsecrate the animal right onto the money, and then he can use the money to buy the sacrifice, right? Meaning we transfer the money, we transfer the sanctity from the animal to the money. If a person, we've said this before, if a person uses a sanctified item, so then he does mi'ilah, right? He is stolen or misappropriated from something that God owns. But then, as we said, if the actual item becomes mundane, it becomes chulin for everyone else, unless it has actual sanctity, meaning like a sacrifice, called kedushat animal is sanctified, then you cannot transfer the sanctity onto something else. So the Gemara says, well, maybe this is only if the sacrifice was supposed to be completely burnt or completely consumed by either the altar or the Kohanim. But maybe if it's what's called kadshe kalim, which is a sacrifice that also the owner eats from, so maybe that, right, maybe that meat that we discussed at the beginning, maybe that could be used to betroth a woman. We say no, you can't use either of the meat to betroth a woman. Okay, let's say, again, we said we were talking about an animal that was found roaming around outside of Jerusalem. So the male animals, the Gemara says, are probably an olah, a burnt offering, and the female animals are probably a shlamim, a peace offering. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, any male animal, a male animal could be a number of different sacrifices, right? It could also be a todah, a thanksgiving sacrifice, or it could also be shlamim, or it could be a peace offering. So therefore, the Gemara says you actually have to buy 2 or 3 animals to cover all the bases, right? It could be an olah, a shlamim, or a todah. You don't have to assume that it's an uncommon sacrifice, which is, let's say, a tithe, or if it's a firstborn, you don't have to assume that it's one of those things. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kol ne'im bidbaro. Okay, the Gemara says the same thing for a female. We said it's probably a shlamim, but it could also be a todah, which is a thanksgiving, and therefore you have to bring 2 animals instead of 1, and you also have to bring the 40 loaves of bread that accompany that sacrifice. We do not assume that it is a sin offering, a korban chatat. The idea here is that a korban chatat has to be a certain age, and you could tell the age of the animal, which I think is very interesting. That they were very sensitive, or could tell the age of the animal, and therefore it cannot be a chatat, but it could be something else. Okay, sorry. Daf 56. Let's say we said that Maser Sheni money, you need to buy food in Jerusalem. Let's say, and you can't buy an animal outside of Jerusalem. Let's say you did by accident. So then the transaction is void because you're not allowed to buy it outside of Jerusalem. If you did it on purpose, you need to bring it to Jerusalem and eat it there. So the Gemara says, well, how does that work? Maybe it's only if you intended to buy a shlamim, to buy a certain sacrifice, but if not, so then the sale is void. But again, as we said, a woman who is betrothed with Maaser Sheni money on purpose, it's valid, again, if it was done on purpose, because she knows that she can only use the money in Jerusalem. So he says, will you be betrothed to me with this money? By the way, the money is Maaser Sheni, so don't forget to buy your pizza or your falafel in Jerusalem. So she knows it. But with an animal, the person isn't going to eat in Jerusalem, and therefore it's not a valid sale. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. How do we know that that's the case? And beautifully, the Gemara says on Daf 56, we're dealing with a case of a learned woman who understands that if she gets Maaser Sheni money, she needs to take it to Jerusalem in order to spend it there. So I love how the Gemara acknowledges the fact that women could be learned and are learned and will know what to do. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 56 tells us that if you try to do Kiddushin, betrothal, with things that are forbidden to get benefit from them, so then it's invalid. So there's a whole list of things. All of these things are what's called asur behana'ah. You are not allowed to get any benefit from them. Not only are you not allowed to eat them, but you can't get benefit from them. So there's a whole list. I'll read the list because then we'll go through each one. So as I said, orla Orla is the produce from fruit trees in their first 3 years. Kilei hakerem, which is called kilayim, which is a mixture of species. Right, if you plant 2 different species, the kilei hakerem is of grapes and wheat. So then both the grapes and the wheat are forbidden from not only from eating them, but also from benefiting from them. An ox that was condemned to death because he killed a person. This is called shor haniskal. He's going to be stoned, this ox. So if he was condemned, but he wasn't killed yet, you cannot get any benefit from him, from it. Egla arufa, we learned that in Sota, the calf that is taken down to the valley in order to be killed, the ceremony if they find a dead body. The birds of the mitzorah, of the leper, the ceremony that he does. The hair of a nazir. I think this is a very good summary of things that we've learned in the past. Peter Chamor is the firstborn of a donkey. The Torah tells us that the firstborn of a donkey needs to be killed. So also this is forbidden from benefit. Basar v'chalav, if you have meat and milk that are mixed together, you cannot get any benefit from them. And the last thing is an animal that was slaughtered in the temple, but it was not meant to be a sacrifice. In Hebrew, it's called chulin shenishchetu be'azara, right? Mundane, a regular animal that's shechted, that's killed in the azara, in the temple. Okay, the Mishnah also tells us that if he sold any of these things and then use the money for Kiddushin, so then it's valid, right? Because again, if you sell sanctified things, so then the money is not sanctified, and therefore you can use the money for betrothal. So the Gemara tells us that there are verses that teach each one of the things that we just mentioned, and it derives how each one of them is forbidden to get any benefit from them. You might have thought that if you slaughter the ox that was condemned to death, maybe if you slaughtered it, like shechted it, before it got stoned, maybe you would be able to eat it. The Gemara says no, it's condemned to death, and that's it. You cannot get any benefit from that animal. We see that any time that the Torah says you may not eat this, it also means that you cannot get benefit from it. You can't, the Gemara says also you cannot slaughter the animal, on one hand with a knife, but even with a flint stone, right? Maybe you'd think, well, you're supposed to stone it. So what if I shecht it, right? What if I slaughter it with a stone? Maybe it would be okay. The Gemara says no. And not only that, but you cannot even derive benefit from the animal's hide, right? You can't make it you can't sell it. It cannot become your leather sofa. You cannot use it. From here, we'll talk about the egla arufa. Again, this is the calf that was taken down to the valley to atone for, I guess I would use it, negligence of the city who didn't protect this person. So the Gemara teaches that it gives atonement like a sacrifice, and therefore, just like a sacrifice, you're not allowed to get benefit from it. So too, the egla arufa, you are not allowed to get benefit from it. So too, the birds of a mitzorah, of a leper, from the ceremony that he's going to do. These birds are forbidden. And then the Gemara asks, from when are they forbidden? One opinion is from when they are slaughtered, when it is slaughtered, right? He takes 2 birds, one is slaughtered and the other is set free. So one is from when it gets slaughtered, or from when they're taken to be part of the ceremony, meaning before you even kill them. The egla arufa is forbidden even when it's still alive, and they're right, meaning from when it's taken to the valley. So maybe so too the bird, and we say no, not necessarily. If the bird was found to be fatally injured, right? Again, we're doing a ceremony that has sanctity to it. You're not allowed to use a trefa. A trefa is an animal that has a fatal injury. That would make it invalid for this ceremony. Therefore, you need to take another bird, and the first bird becomes permissible to use, right? It loses its sanctity. So the Gemara says, no, what's the case? It's not that it loses its sanctity, rather it was never sanctified in the first place. There's a machloket if, again, the ceremony for the leper, for the metzorah, involves a number of different items. So we have two birds, but you also need a branch of a certain tree and a bush, and they have to be tied together with a special thread. So the Gemara asks or tells us that there's a machloket if you don't have all the items with you at the time of the slaughter, of the shechita. The question is the bird consecrated or not? Meaning you didn't have everything there. Is the shechita that wasn't valid, is it enough? Is it valid enough in order to prohibit the bird, or no? Right? And either way, it seems to be saying that it becomes prohibited at the time of the slaughter and not before that. The Gemara tells us that you can eat the bird that was set free. Remember, I said that there are two birds in this ceremony. One is killed and one is set free. The one that's set free, you're allowed to eat. So the Gemara says, well, why? So one answer is we generally do not prohibit eating or getting benefit from a living animal. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, there are cases where a living animal is not allowed to be used, right? If, let's say, it was used for idolatry, or right, it was either set aside for idolatry or worshipped as an idol. These are prohibited. So the Gemara says, correct. Right. Well, actually, they're prohibited to be sacrifices, but you could eat them. So the Gemara says, you're right, there are, right, most animals, when they're alive, do not have are not forbidden to eat, but there are a few exceptions to that rule. The metzorah, the leper, isn't allowed in a walled city, and therefore, after the ceremony, a Kohen takes the free bird into the city and then sets it free towards a field, because the verse says it has to be in the field, but he can't send it to the sea or send it to the desert, and therefore that is what is done with this bird. Other things we mentioned, the hair of the Nazir is sanctified, therefore you're not allowed to get any benefit from it. The firstborn of the donkey, after its neck is broken, meaning after it's killed, so then you cannot get benefit from it, which means that before you can. Basar v'chalav, meat and milk. It says you can't cook it 3 times. Why does it say you can't cook it 3 times? The first is because you can't eat it. The second is because you can't get benefit from it. And the third is because you can't cook it. And that's how we understand that you cannot get any benefit from meat and milk. We talked about chulin ba'azara, meaning a regular animal that is killed in the temple. So this is a beautiful way to illustrate it. The Gemara says, right, Hashem says, right, God says, you shecht, you slaughter my animal in my place, right, a sacrifice in the temple, and you sacrifice yours in your place, right, your food you sacrifice in your place. Your place is outside of the Beit HaMikdash, outside of the temple. Therefore, you can't shecht my things in your place, right? God says, right? You can't, this is called shchitat chutz. You can't take a sacrifice and slaughter it outside of the temple. That is very serious. And you can't take your food, right, our food, and take it into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, and slaughter it over there. However, even though we just compared those two things, the punishment is different. Meaning, the punishment, if you take a sacrifice and you slaughter it outside of the temple, you get karet, which is the most severe punishment. But if you do the opposite, if you take a regular animal and you shecht it in the temple, you do not get karet. So there are parallels, but it is not completely parallel. Okay. We said you cannot shecht this animal in the Azara, in the courtyard of the temple. And we said, so the Gemara tells us not only can you not shecht the unblemished animal, but even a blemished animal, and even a wild animal, and even birds, right? Meaning even things that aren't necessarily the same or similar to sacrifices, you still cannot kill them in the courtyard, in the Beit HaMikdash. And if you do it, you're not allowed to eat it. Again, as we said, it is forbidden to eat from these animals. Okay, Daf 58. If you slaughter an animal in the Azara, in the courtyard, we said you cannot get benefit from it, and you can't even feed it to the dogs. That's only the case of a trefa. If the animal is fatally wounded, then you can feed it to the dogs, but if not, then you cannot. Okay, let's say that this animal that entered in the temple that was chulin, was mundane, let's say it turns out that it was fatally injured. So then Rabbi Shimon says you can get benefit from it, and the sages say you cannot get benefit from it. But if you sell any of the things that we just mentioned and you use the money, you can betroth a woman. It is valid. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 58. The following items you can use to betroth a woman, even though not everybody can eat or use these items. So what are these items? Truma, again, the gifts given to the Kohen, Ma'asrot, the tithes, Matanot Kehuna, right, other gifts that were given to the priests, the water of the ashes of the red heifer, Mei Chatat, and the ashes themselves, the Efer Chatat, all of these things, even though you really are not supposed to use them for your own benefit, you would betroth a woman with these items. So let's see. The Mishnah continues that let's say you used trumot or masrot, things that have to go to priests. You could use it to betroth a woman, even if she's not a priest, right? Even if she's a Yisrael. Because again, Rashi explains that these things, every person has the right to decide who's going to get my gifts. And that right has a value, right? It's called tovat hana'ah. It has a value that I get to choose who I'm giving it to. And therefore, that with that value, I can betroth a woman. So now the Gemara says, well, it's actually a machloket if these things are considered value or not. So the Gemara says maybe they do not have intrinsic value. Rather, the case is a Yisrael who inherited this property or money or things from his Kohen grandfather, right? His mother's father. And we see it as already being separated, and therefore he can use it because he has rights to this property, to this item. If you remember, we discussed tevel, which is produce that hasn't been separated yet from its tithes. So there's a machloket. If, let's say, someone steals tevel, and he wants to repay afterwards, does he pay the full value of everything, or does he only have to pay back the chulin value, right? The mundane value, because the value of the gifts are not yours. They're going to be given to the priest. Again, maybe the machloket is also about this, again, tovat hana'ah, the fact that there's value to my ability to give it to a priest, or which priest, or maybe not. That's not what they are arguing about. Maybe everyone agrees that there is no monetary value to tovat hana'ah, to this idea of me getting to choose which Kohen to give it to. Rather, the machloket is if he inherited it from his Kohen grandfather, do we see it as already separated or not? Right? Or maybe the machloket is there a minimum amount that needs to be separated for truma or not? Right? And then who do we penalize? Do we penalize the thief or the owner? Let's say, again, we were talking about like misappropriating sanctified things or quasi-sanctified things. If someone took payment to sprinkle the water with the ashes in them, right, to purify someone. So the Gemara says that the sprinkling is invalid, right? You're not allowed to pay for this service. So too for the mixing of the ashes with the water. So the case is that if they charged for transporting the ashes or drawing the water, so then that works, because it is a valid betrothal, because you can charge for labor. You can't charge for the actual sprinkling of the water, but the preparation of the water you can charge for, and therefore it would be valid. With that, we finished the second chapter, and now we're going to move on to the third chapter. So the third chapter tells us that if a person sent an agent to betroth a certain woman, and then the agent betroths her for himself, that is valid. He could do it. We'll discuss how it's very not nice, but he could do it. Again, it has to be that he used his own money, otherwise it would not work. Let's say a person says, please be betrothed to me in 30 days. And then someone else betroths her within those 30 days, meaning 2 weeks into that time period. So then if she accepts that betrothal from the second guy, she is betrothed. It does work. And it is so much so that if he was a priest, she can actually eat truma, right? If he was a Kohen, she can eat truma. Let's say the original guy said, please be betrothed to me from now and then in 30 days, right? Me'achshav ve'ad shlushim yom. And then a second person comes and tries to betroth her. She's betrothed, but not betrothed to both of them. And she cannot eat truma if the second guy was a Kohen. So now the Gemara is going to explain this. The Gemara says that the agent, again, the first case was the agent kind of taking the girl for himself. So the agent, I can see a good rom-com about that. The agent acted inappropriately, but it is valid, meaning he has the right to betroth whoever he wants. Daf 49. So we have two cases. Our Mishnah says you told the agent, but there's a Braita that says you told a friend to betroth the woman. So the Gemara says we need both of these statements, whether it's a friend or a shaliach or an agent. Why? Because either way, it's valid. And either way, it was a disgusting thing to do. So both of those things are true. Now we have some stories. Ravin Chasida went to betroth a woman for his son, but then he decided to betroth her for himself. And it works. But the Gemara gives different explanations. Maybe it was because the family didn't want the son to marry her. They wanted the father to marry her, right? Meaning it wasn't that he stole the girl from his son. Rather, there were extenuating circumstances. And he couldn't wait to tell the son because he was scared someone else would betroth her in the meantime. There are other stories of sages that were sent to buy land, but they ended up buying it for themselves instead of doing the agency that they were sent to do. But when they realized what happened, they tried to give it back. They tried to gift it to the original sender, and they did not. But they did not want to accept it. We mentioned about 30 days. So let's say a person gave her money and said, please be betrothed to me in 30 days. Even if the money was already spent, right? The next day she went out and bought herself a new fur coat. At the end of 30 days, even if the money itself doesn't exist anymore, she is mikudeshet, she is betrothed to him. The money is not seen as collateral and it's not seen as a loan. It was Kiddushin from the beginning. We said right there, if a second guy comes, so she's betrothed to the second guy. Let's say nobody comes. But now, let's say she says, you know what, never mind, I don't want to do this, right? So is she allowed to take back what she said, right? She originally accepted the Kiddushin, but now she doesn't want it anymore. So there's a machloket if she can nullify what she said already, right? The statement is dibur mivatel dibur, right? Her statement can or cannot nullify her other statement, right? She said yes, and now she wants to say no, right? Is she allowed to do that? The Gemara says, well, wait a minute. He gave her money, so there was an action. It's not only dibur, it's not only a statement. So we say, no, not necessarily. Maybe that's not seen as an action. We bring another case with get, and we have this in Gittin. If a person sent a get with an agent, the husband can retract it as long as he didn't give it to the wife yet. So now again, this is seen as a dibur, right? No, 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 yes, yes, yes. Those are all statements, and you're nullifying it with another statement. So it seems that that is valid, and it's not seen as there being an action. It's not seen as an action. So the Gemara gives other examples of this idea. A utensil, a vessel becomes susceptible to impurity, to tum'ah, when it's finished, right? Till then, it's not susceptible to impurity. Let's say it's unfinished and the person says, oh, you know what? I really like this bowl. I'm not going to glaze it. So then your machshava, right, your thought, changes this item into finished, and now it is susceptible to tum'ah. But The Gemara says the only way to reverse this, though, is to do an actual action, right? You have to say, oh, no, I didn't mean that it's finished. It needs to be sanded down a little bit more. So if you sand it down, that changes the status, right? The action changes the status, not the oral statement. Okay, so now another case. A woman sends an agent to accept Kiddushin from a certain man, and then she, the original woman, accepts Kiddushin from another person. So whichever one comes first, meaning whichever betrothal in actuality comes first, that's the valid one. As opposed to saying, no, she sent the agent and that's the only thing that could happen. Right? If she nullifies the agency, so there's a machloket if she can or not. Again, as we said, can a statement, dibur, nullify another dibur or not? And the Gemara seems to say that the law is that it can nullify something else. Can a person use a get that he took back, right, that he nullified the agency, the shlichut for? The Gemara says, no, once you nullify it, you can't use it anymore. Or maybe he just nullified the agency, the shlichut, but not the actual get, and the get itself remains valid. If a person betroths a woman by saying in 30 days, and then the second person comes within the 30, so we said she's betrothed. So now the Gemara says she's betrothed forever, meaning that's it, she's betrothed. Or do we say she's betrothed till day 30, but on day 30, the original betrothal kicks in? For sure, if he says from now in 30 days, so then that would work. Or the Gemara says, no, we're not sure if you're giving a condition right now, but really in 30 days. Or are you saying now, oh no, never mind, in 30 days, right? How do we understand that understanding? And with that, we finish today's daf. I think maybe I'll open it up if anybody has any questions. I know things are very challenging at the moment, but I figured if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I think I'll stop the recording, and then if you want to talk, we can talk a little bit. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and Shalom being the underlying word. So I'm just going to stop the recording.
It's token,
Yes.